In the heart of the ancient realm of Eldoria, where snow-capped mountains kissed the heavens and rivers shimmered with the echoes of forgotten legends, a shadow spread across the land. The once peaceful kingdom now trembled, for from the fiery heights of the Crimson Peaks descended Varkor, the dragon whose name was carved into nightmares. His scales blazed like molten gold, his wings eclipsing the sun itself. With each beat of his vast wings, the ground quaked, and with each roar, the valleys shook with terror. The villages below lived in dread, for Varkor demanded tribute, a sacrifice of their own flesh and blood, lest he rain fire upon them. Fear clung to the air like a choking fog. Yet among those villages stood one who refused to bow. Her name was Elara, her hair wild as the wind, framed eyes that burned with unyielding defiance. She was the daughter of a knight whose sword had once challenged Varkor and whose life had been claimed by Dragonfire. From the ashes of loss, she had forged her vow to avenge her father, to free her people, and to face the terror that even kings dared not name. Clad in leather and steel, she carried Emberblade, a sword unlike any other born of fallen stars, glowing faintly as though carrying the whispers of the heavens. And so, with steady breath and trembling heart, she began her journey. Through the whispering woods she walked, where trees spoke in hushed tones and shadows danced with secrets. It was there she crossed paths with a stranger, a man cloaked in mystery. Finn, the thief. His smile was sharp as a dagger, his eyes restless, carrying both mischief and regret. Their meeting was no friendship at first. Steel met steel, suspicion flared. Yet destiny wove their paths tighter with each passing moment. By the fire's glow, Elara saw the truth hidden behind Finn's grin, a heart yearning for redemption. And in turn, he saw in her the unshakable fire of hope. Together, they pressed onward. Across swamps where the dead trees clawed at the sky, through battles with enchanted guardians clad in ghostly armor, their bond was tested and tempered. Each fight drew them closer, until mistrust became trust, and trust became alliance. In a forgotten temple, beneath broken stone and glowing runes, they uncovered a prophecy. The mural spoke of a warrior, a thief, and a dragon, bound not by fear, but by unity. It was not a tale of destruction, but of balance restored. And so, side by side, they approached the dragon's fiery lair. The ground trembled with every step. Rivers of molten fire coursed through the cavern's heart, and the heat stung their skin. From the shadows emerged Varkor, vast and terrible, eyes burning like suns, voice rolling like thunder.
"Why do you seek me, little warrior?"
he rumbled, his words shaking the cavern walls. Elara's hand tightened on Emberblade. Her voice, steady, though her pulse raced, answered, "I seek not to slay you, but to understand you. Your rage is born of pain, your hunger for tribute, a cry for what was lost. I ask you not to remain a monster, but to rise as protector." Varkor's gaze flickered. For the first time in centuries, doubt trembled within the beast. His fire dimmed, his wings lowered. Finn stepped forward then, his voice carrying the weight of countless broken lives. "The people suffer, Dragon, not out of defiance, but fear. They wish only for peace, and they would honor you, not as destroyer, but as guardian." The cavern fell silent, save for the hiss of lava and the crackle of fire. At last, Varkor lowered his massive head, the molten glow in his chest fading. "Then let us unite," he declared, "and bring balance to Eldoria." And so it was. With wings spread not in wrath, but in protection, the dragon soared above the kingdom, Elara at his side, Finn at her back. The people, once bowed by terror, now lifted their eyes in awe. Fear gave way to hope, despair to triumph. In time, the tale of the warrior, the thief, and the dragon was etched into song and story, not as a tale of conquest, but of courage, compassion, and unity. For in the darkest shadow, they had found not destruction, but the light of a new dawn. The news of Varkor's alliance with the people of Eldoria spread faster than the winds themselves. Across the 7 realms, whispers turned into fear, and fear into envy. In the faraway capital of Valdoria, King Althor sat upon his throne of black stone, his eyes burning with cruelty. To hear that a forgotten village, the weakest of all, could become a potential threat with a dragon at its side was an insult he could not bear. He vowed to bring Eldoria to its knees, to seize the beast or reduce the land to ash. General Kalen, the crown's most decorated commander, listened in silence. Yet even as he bowed before the king's command, a shadow of doubt stirred in his heart. Far to the south, within Eldoria's humble hall, unease settled over its people like a heavy fog. The elders whispered of armies beyond counting. Yet Elara's voice rose above their fear. She would not surrender Varkor.
I will never surrender Varkor.
Finn, ever the skeptic, warned them that armies were not their only threat. He said,
"Treachery often strikes closer than an enemy's sword."
His words proved true sooner than any expected. Suspicion crept quietly into the hall, though none dared yet speak its name. That night, as the valley slept, Finn sat apart, his dagger catching the last of the light. Elara joined him, her eyes unyielding. She bore the weight of 1,000 fears, yet her gaze burned fierce. Finn's smirk held no joy, only the sharp edge of worry. Then Varkor descended, his wings blotting out the stars. "The night is not safe," the dragon warned. "Shadows move where men should not." And soon the shadows struck. From rooftops and alleys came the killers of Aralith the Shadow Blades. They fell upon Eldoria like smoke, their blades glinting under moonlight. Elara met them with Emberblade in hand, her fury lighting the night. Finn moved among them like a shadow, his daggers flashing death. And above all, Varkor roared, fire sweeping the streets, scattering assassins like leaves in a storm. By dawn, the attackers lay broken, the village smoldering in silence. But one, before his last breath, revealed the truth. Betrayal had come from within. The words struck like a blade to the heart. Even Elara's grip faltered. Finn's warnings echoed bitterly. Knives often came from one's own table. Fear now poisoned trust. Unity began to crack. Far away, Empress Nyla smiled as she read the news. To her, the dragon was not threat, but opportunity. In the desert, Sultan Rashid laughed, vowing to choke Valdoria's power. And in the cold north, Lady Serenia whispered a name in prayer, a thief who haunted her heart. Back in Eldoria, dawn rose cold. Elara gazed upon the valley, smoke mingling with morning mist. Beside her stood Finn and Varkor, 3 against the storm to come. For the first blade had been drawn, and the game of realms had begun. Please subscribe. The desert stretched endless, a sea of gold beneath a merciless Sunday. From the edge of the dunes, Varkor's massive wings stirred whirlwinds of sand as he descended. Elara placed a hand on his scaled chest, steadying him.
We go alone from here.
Finn glanced up at the dragon with unease, but said nothing. He knew the truth as Elara did. Arriving at Sultan Rashid's gates with a beast of fire at their side would not be seen as diplomacy, but as war. Varkor rumbled low in his chest, reluctant, yet he obeyed. He remained in the wastelands beyond the city, his molten eyes fixed upon them until the dunes swallowed him from sight. Al-Rahim's capital rose like a mirage from the sands. Sandstone palaces crowned with turquoise domes shimmered in the sunlight, banners of crimson and gold snapping in the wind. Streets bustled with merchants and caravans, their scents of spice and smoke rising into the air. Yet above all loomed the palace of the Sultan, a tower of ivory and firelit banners where wealth and cruelty entwined. The Sultan greeted them not with steel, but with laughter. A man draped in flowing robes of white and gold, he reclined on a throne of carved ivory, a goblet of wine in his jeweled hand. His eyes glittered with amusement as Elara and Finn bowed. He praised their courage, mocked their defiance, and in the same breath dismissed their plight. To him, Eldoria was nothing a pebble beneath the heel of empires. Yet behind his laughter, Finn saw calculation. The Sultan's markets thrived on chaos, and a dragon meant not destruction, but fortune. If Eldoria fell, Al-Rahim would seize its precious mineral veins. As Elara spoke of alliance, Rashid's courtiers sneered. Their voices dripped with contempt, each word echoing through the gilded hall like poison. "A village of beggars," they whispered. "A thief and a woman knight." Rashid silenced them with a wave, but his smile only widened. He offered not peace, but humiliation. If Eldoria wished Al-Rahim's protection, they must bow publicly before his throne and offer tribute, not gold, but Varkor himself. The demand was a blade wrapped in honey, impossible to accept. Elara's jaw tightened, her hand brushing the hilt of Emberblade. But Finn caught her arm. To strike now was to lose everything. Rashid's laughter rolled through the court like thunder, but behind it lay something more dangerous: interest. His gaze lingered on Elara, not as a queen to crush, but as a flame to tame. That night, the palace hosted a feast in their honor. Musicians played, dancers whirled, goblets overflowed. Yet beneath the music, Finn felt the sting of watching eyes. Servants lingered too long, guards hovered too close. They were not guests, they were prey. Whispers coiled through the banquet hall like serpents. Some courtiers spoke of taking Elara as Rashid's bride, binding Eldoria through marriage. Others urged her execution, to prove the Sultan's dominance. Finn drank sparingly, his hand never far from his dagger. It was then the truth struck like a sandstorm. Rashid had never intended alliance. He had lured them into a trap. Beyond the palace gates, his riders massed in secret, preparing to take the Eldorian lives in the sands outside the city walls. Elara rose, her voice calm but her eyes burning. She refused Rashid's mockery, swearing Eldoria would bow to no throne. The court fell silent, then erupted in laughter. Rashid himself only smiled, raising his goblet in mock salute. Then let the sands decide, his voice rang. At dawn, the trap was sprung. The desert roared with hoofbeats. From the palace balconies, Rashid and his courtiers watched as columns of horsemen poured into the dunes, encircling Elara and Finn. The sky burned red with sunrise, as war drums thundered across the desert. Elara drew Emberblade, its celestial glow cutting against the rising Sunday. Finn's daggers flashed at her side. They fought like fire and shadow, her strikes strong and radiant. His swift and cunning. Their courage held the tide for moments that felt eternal. But wave after wave of riders crashed upon them. The sands turned dark beneath their boots. Exhaustion clawed at their limbs. They were being overwhelmed. And then the moment came. A dozen spears leveled at Elara's chest. Finn beaten to one knee, their strength spent. The world slowed, despair pressing heavy. And in that heartbeat, the sky itself split with a roar. Varkor. From beyond the dunes he had felt it, Elara's fear, her pulse quickening in mortal peril. Since the day she claimed him, their bond had grown into something near spiritual, a thread woven between heart and flame. He had heard her without words. The dragon tore across the heavens. Wings blotting out the Sunday fire cascaded from his jaws, sweeping through the enemy ranks. Riders scattered, banners turned to ash, the sands glowing under his wrath. His fury broke the circle, buying Elara and Finn the breath of life. The desert fell silent, but for the crackle of flame and the groans of the defeated. Survivors fled into the wastes, their cries swallowed by the wind. Elara and Finn stood side by side, scorched and weary but unbroken. Above them, Varkor circled, his molten eyes blazing not with wrath alone, but with something deeper. The bond of protector and kin. High above, from his palace, Rashid's laughter echoed through the desert wind. Elara knew this was only the beginning. Rashid had not sought to destroy them. He had tested them. And now he had seen the strength of Eldoria's fire. The sands had been stained not with weakness, but with warning. A message carried by fire across the realms. The sea was restless, its waves striking the black cliffs of Eldoria with thunderous force. Salt spray hung in the air, stinging the eyes of villagers who stood watching the horizon. Out beyond the foam, dark ships waited like wolves in a circle. Their sails were black as night, their prows carved into the shapes of sea serpents. The blockade had begun. Yes, a siege. These were the ships of Empress Nyla of Karazhan, mistress of the seas, feared for her power and cunning. Her fleets could choke the coastlines of kingdoms and had crushed stronger kingdoms than Eldoria. Now they had come for Eldoria.
We have nothing left.
Just a few seeds.
Already, food was running thin. Grain was counted seed by seed. Nets returned empty. The people whispered in fear, their hope dwindling with each tide. Elara stood upon the cliff with Varkor at her side, the dragon's golden scales dull beneath the gray sky. His tail lashed the rock, sparks crackling in the storm air. She clenched her fist around Emberblade's hilt. They mean to starve us, she thought. Finn watched the blockade as a gambler studies a table. He had the sea's weather in his bones and too many secrets in his blood. His eyes were sharp and thoughtful. He had once walked the streets of Karazhan, and the sight of Nyla's banners stirred memories he seldom spoke of. When he spoke, it was softly. Ships don't strangle ashore. Men do, and men can be undone. That night, Finn slipped away in a small skiff, rowing through fog and shadow. Twice he lay flat as enemy patrols passed above him, their torches cutting across the waves. Thrice he prayed to no one at all. By dawn, the white towers of Karazhan's harbor city rose before him, a vision of wealth and power, domes of turquoise shining under the morning sun. Within the palace, Empress Nyla sat upon her throne. She wore green scaled silk and a circlet of opals like captured sea foam. Courtiers bloomed around her like poisonous flowers. When Finn came in before her, he bowed as a servant bows, and when he straightened, she was already smiling. "Welcome home," she said, as if the words cost her nothing. He felt the old name comb his spine like cold fingers, Ashwind, but she did not say it, not yet. Instead, she gestured to the harbor, where her ships shifted like shadows.
"A dragon,"
she murmured, eyes bright.
"What a splendid rumor to own. Eldoria has learned to roar."
Eldoria has learned to live,
Finn said.
Life is the art of arranging pieces on a board other people think is flat.
She was already walking, and the court flowed after her like silk. You came to negotiate. I oblige you, but hear my tide. I do not bend, I measure. She slowed, so that her words slid into him like a blade. What matters is not what you want, it's what you will do when wanting fails. On a balcony overlooking the armory pier, Nyla showed him her latest invention, giant ballistae that fired chains with barbed hooks, nets woven with iron, and cauldrons of oil to pour into the sea. A dragon can be taught to drown, she whispered with a calm smile. And when yours does, Eldoria will bow. That evening, Nyla held a feast. The banquet hall glowed with golden braziers. Music drifted like honey. Dancers moved like firelight, their shadows painting the walls. Finn sat among courtiers, but his eyes were drawn only to her. Nyla leaned close. Her perfume was warm spice and rose. Her hand brushed his arm as if it belonged there. "Why fight for a starving village?" she asked softly. "Here, you would have gold. Command me." Her laughter was soft, dangerous. She spoke of giving him rank among her captains, of silks instead of rags, of being more than a thief. Her gaze held him like chains, shimmering with promise and peril. For a heartbeat, Finn stumbled. He considered the offer, the warmth of her hand, the promise of power. It all appealed to him. He couldn't have asked for more. But he tore himself away. Eldoria's survival weighed heavier. Later that night, when people were carried away by the taste of wine and the artistry of the dancers, he slipped from her court. He moved through Nyla's halls as softly as memory. He counted guard steps, learned which keys slept under which cushions, watched where the harbor chains ran, and where the signal flags rested furled. Then he escaped with stolen maps and one bitter truth. Nyla had spies even inside Eldoria. When he returned, Elara's relief was clouded. She saw the shadow of Nyla still clinging to him, the scent of her halls, the faraway look in his eyes. Doubt twisted in her chest. Could Finn truly be trusted? The storm broke before dawn. Waves towered high. Rain lashed the sea. Nyla's navy moved in, black sails filling with wind. Drums pounded over the waves. From the flagship's foredeck, Nyla watched beneath an oilskin canopy. Her expression, not cruel, not kind, merely intent. The face of a storm, deciding where to spend itself. Along Eldoria's cliffs, villagers scrambled to lash boats and shutter doors. Elara stood in the rain, with Varkor towering behind her, heat simmering off his scales, his tail gouging the rock.
Stay high. Strike only if you must.
He rumbled, and the stone remembered it for hours after. Then Elara leapt to the nearest cutter boat as it rose on a swell. 5 fishermen who had loved Eldoria longer than they had loved breath shoved off with her, and the boat knifed into the trough as rain stitched the world to water. Overhead, Varkor soared, fire glowing deep in his throat. The sea exploded with fury. Ballistae fired, chains tipped with hooks whistling through the storm. The first missed. Varkor was swift. Another chain bolt fired. He twisted. It missed again. A third sang and struck true, biting into Varkor's scales. The sky tore. He roared in agony as the chain dragged him down toward the waves, his wings thrashing in panic. "Elara!" a fisherman screamed, but she was already moving. She vaulted to the bow, rain stinging her face. When the chain swept close, she leapt, catching hold. Her body swung above the sea, the storm tearing at her cloak. Hand over hand, she climbed. Lightning split the sky, turning her into a silver figure against black clouds. The chain's barbs dug into Varkor's side. He thrashed, steam rising as fire fought the storm. Elara clung tighter, boots slipping, knuckles white, Emberblade flared in her grasp. With a cry that was half fury, half prayer, she struck the lock. Sparks exploded. Metal screamed, but it remained intact. Once more she struck. Metal began to glow. The wind tried to throw her into history. She did not let go. Below, Finn stole onto the ship upon which the ballistae was mounted and moved like a rumor through wet rope and shouting men, completely unnoticed. He slid under a rail, crossed a grating, and found the windlass that fed the chain through its iron throat. Finn heaved on the brake and felt the mechanism shudder, heard somewhere far off a dragon's agony through clenched teeth. He scooped some oil from a barrel close by and poured it across the gears and hurled a lantern into the wound. Fire took greedily. The brake screamed. The chain jumped. Finn ran with the fire behind him, leapt for a line, and swung out over a space where a deck had been, his boots finding a railing, and dove into the sea just as the ship erupted in fire and began to sink. Above, on the barbs, Elara struck again. The lock glowed red, then shattered. Elara drew her last breath and fell freely. Then she smashed against the sea like a stone and didn't feel the second impact. For a long breath, nothing had a name. The chain snapped loose. Varkor surged upward with a roar that split the heavens. Fire poured from his jaws, painting the storm in gold. Nyla's ships burned, sails turning to ash, decks shattering. Men screamed and dove into the boiling sea. On her flagship, Nyla did not rage. She only watched, calm and calculating.
So, Eldoria has teeth.
She gave the order to retreat, not in defeat, but in patience. The lesson was learned. Elara woke to the rhythm of oars and an old man's prayer. The fishermen were dragging her into the cutter, their faces white ridges of fear. Varkor hung above them like a torn storm cloud, his eyes the color of molten resolve. She coughed up seawater and a name.
Here,
he said from the stern voice, raw, hair slick with rain. He did not say how close the fire had come, or what he had set alight in Nyla's throat. The fisherman grinned with too many teeth.
you flew, girl.
He said to Elara, and wept like a child for the joy of telling it. By dusk, the blockade loosened enough to breathe. Not broken, not yet, but wary. Fires dotted the horizon where ships had burned to their waterlines. The storm moved off to spend itself on some other shore. On the headland, villagers built pyres of wet wood that smoked like unspooling ghosts and cried that they had lived to cry again. Finn climbed the cliff path alone and waited where the wind could take his thoughts before they rotted in him. Elara found him there, wrapped in a blanket that remembered other rains. She looked at him as if the answers were written under his skin. He looked away first. From his pocket he drew a folded scrap of sea-stiff paper and set it in her palm. The ink had run, but the words were clear enough. Your traitor wears honest eyes. No seal, only a smear of green that might have been a courtier's ring dragged through ink, or something else. The paper had been tucked into his hands by one of the courtiers at the feast Nyla held for him just before he escaped. Elara closed her fingers over the message, as if it were a knife she meant to keep. Far beyond the sea, Nyla watched from a balcony of light. In the dying sun, she turned a ring idly, the opal's heart the exact shade of the smear on the page, and considered where the board might tilt if one particular piece were to shatter. Then, she sealed a letter with her emerald ring. In it, she offered her daughter's hand in marriage to Duke Merrick of Ravengard. Her fleets alone were mighty, but with his armies, her power would double. Night came quiet. Elara sat on the cliff with the dragon's warmth at her back and the salt drying on her skin. Finn sat near enough to count her breaths, but not close enough to steal one. Between them lay the paper and the ocean, and a question older than either of them. What can be trusted when even courage has a price? Varkor lifted his head, the way beasts do when storms are still far but walking. In the dark, he was only the shape of a promise. The village fires guttered, then steadied. Somewhere below, nets hung to dry for a morning that might bear fish or teeth. They had not won, but they had not drowned. And on some nights, in some wars, that was how legends learned to tread water long enough to reach the shore. Please subscribe. Valdoria's palace rose like a fortress of night. Black stone drank the dawn. Iron banners hissed in the wind. In the throne hall, torches burned blue, throwing tall, angry shadows. King Althar sat rigid upon his block of obsidian, jaw clenched, knuckles white upon the arms of his chair. The news from the sea had crossed mountains in a single breath. The blockade shaken, ships burned, a dragon alive and unbroken.
I will not tolerate this defiance.
He did not shout. His fury came cold. General Kalen knelt on the tiled floor, helm under his arm, battle scars bright as silver under torchlight. He had led 100 campaigns and buried the cost of each beneath layers of duty. The king's voice fell like iron.
March. Crush Eldoria before a story becomes a banner. March.
The order was simple. The weight behind it was not. Kalen bowed his head, oath before breath. He rose and turned, feeling each step as if the tiles themselves judged him. The army rolled from Valdoria like a storm without rain. Standards snapping, drums thundering, ranks in perfect lines. Baggage wagons creaked. Smiths walked beside the iron smell of their carts. Horses tore frost from the fields with their hooves. Snow still clung to the shoulders of distant peaks. Kalen rode at the column's front, visor up, eyes dark and steady. He counted grain sacks. He counted stairs. He counted the small silences of men who have fought long enough to recognize the shape of a mistake before it is made. They camped by a river choked with ice. A messenger reached him in the night, cloak stiff with cold, bearing a sealed parchment wreathed in wax the color of old blood. The king's hand. No amnesty. No prisoners. No negotiation. Kalen dismissed the courier and stood alone by the water's edge while the camp slept. Steel had always been simple. This was not. He thought of villages that could not run, of a name that would outlive him like a stain. He closed his eyes and let the river's voice speak the truth he did not yet dare. Eldoria woke under a thin sun clinging to the rim of the world. Nets hung empty, smoke rose from damp wood, and the people moved with the careful steps of those who had survived once and did not trust morning to keep its promise. Elara and Finn returned to the cliff path with the wind in their hair and salt still dried to their skin. Varkor slept folded like a mountain near the edge, his scales dulling in the pale light, his breath a slow fog. The village greeted them with relief that tasted almost like grief. Children reached for Elara's hands. Fishermen clapped Finn's shoulders and looked away from his eyes. The note he had brought, "Your traitor wears honest eyes," seemed to whisper even when no one spoke. Elara kept it in her cloak, as if it might cut her if she loosened her grip. They buried the week's dead quietly. They mended boats without song. They shared bread thin as paper and pretended not to notice. From the high pasture, a shepherd's horn sent a warning down the valley. Dust plume on the northern road. Not a cloud, an army. Across the border plain, Kalen's banners stabbed the sky. The army spilled over the ridges in disciplined waves, ranks ordered by years of habit. Scouts swept ahead like crows. The first sight of Eldoria, stone cottages, a narrow hall, fields struggling back from winter, looked less like an enemy and more like a place that remembered rain. Drums called the battalions to a halt upon a ridge of scrub and shale. Kalen watched the valley through his spyglass and found no walls, no towers, no satisfaction in the ease of it. He lowered the glass and closed his fist until the leather creaked. A captain rode up with a king's sealed edict in his saddlebag, ready to speak the words again if the general had forgotten. He had not. "Form lines," Kalen said at last. Steel whispered as it left scabbards. Standards dipped. Then he added words his voice had not planned. "And wait." The captain blinked. Orders carried across the company like a strange wind.
Hold! Hold!
The army steadied on its heels and listened to its own breathing. Time lengthened. Elara rode out alone beyond bowshot, cloak snapping, ember blade sheathed at her hip. She stopped on the scrub plain where both sides could see her and raised her hand, palm open, to a man she did not know. General Kalen descended the ridge at a measured pace, banners behind him like rivers of color. He halted 10 horse lengths away. For a long moment there was only wind and the restless shuffling of cavalry mounts. He studied Elara's face and found no arrogance there, only a resolve as bright as the steel she wore. She studied him and found no hunger, only the armor of a man who preferred orders to the sound of his own heart and was failing at the preference today. Few words passed. "Spare us this," she said, not as a plea, not as a dare, but as if naming something already true. His jaw set. "I am bound," he answered, and in that honest sentence she heard the fracture line. A shadow crossed the sun, the shape of a dragon somewhere high, far enough to be rumor, near enough to be weight. An arrow hissed. It thunked into the soil between them, feathered black, fletched with dye the color of old moss. Not a soldier's shot. Too clean, too quiet. Both heads turned at once. On Kalen's ridge, a figure had raised a second bow from within the press of men. The general's hand moved before his mind did. His sword flashed, a snap of command cracked the air, and the archer went down under the boots of the nearest file. Kalen's eyes returned to Elara's soul. Something unspoken passed between them that had nothing to do with flags. He lifted a hand and signaled his standard bearers. The banners dipped once, twice, and then the great companies began to peel away, not in flight, not in surrender, but into the measured geometry of an encampment. Tents rose like a second town. Fires remained unlit. Siege engines stayed hooded. The army sat down upon the earth and pretended to think. Kalen turned his horse. As he wheeled, a small object left his gauntlet and dropped into the scrub between them, lost to any eyes except the ones that had been waiting. He did not look back. Elara dismounted and found it. A coin shaved thin, stamped with the crest of Eldoria, its edges nicked in a soldier's code to mark the hours of a clock. A single notch at dawn, another at dusk. A message without ink. "You have today, perhaps tonight." She slipped the coin into her glove and rode home without triumph. The camp held. Kalen sat in his command tent with maps spread like old scars and the king's edict heavy on the table. His captains argued for momentum. His quartermaster fretted about ration lines. His scouts reported the rumor of wings in the cloud seam, the glow of something that could be sunrise and was not. A stranger came into the circle of lamplight and stood as if invited. He wore leather without mark, a hood without dust, a face built for disappearing. Kalen's hand hovered near the hilt he had not drawn at parley. "I serve the crown," the stranger said. His voice did not announce a name. The king wonders why the sky over Eldoria remains untroubled by ash. Kalen dismissed his officers with a glance and watched the man watch him. The stranger's smile had no heat. "Delay," the man said, "is a kind of treason that smells like rain, soft at first, then everywhere." When the tent was quiet again, Kalen took up the king's parchment and fed it to the lamp flame, one edge at a time, holding it long enough to memorize the shapes of letters dissolving into smoke. He ground the ash with his thumb until it disappeared into the weave of the rug. Outside, a low roar gathered and faded, the sound of a great beast folding itself back into patience. In Eldoria's hall, the elders spoke too quickly. Names were offered to the fire in their throats. A miller with a clear gaze, A healer with steady hands, honest eyes. The note inside Elara's cloak seemed to burn against her ribs. Finn stood apart, listening to the music of fear and recognizing each note. He had played these halls once, the soft larcenies of trust and doubt. His gaze caught a corner shadow moving when it should not. His fingers found the nicked edge of a windowsill where a watcher had rested too often. He followed the trail to a threshold and found only air and a fragment of green wax crushed beneath a heel. He brought it to Elara's palm, emerald, not moss. A memory of Nyla's ring in another room, another light. The net was larger than any of them wanted. Varkor shifted his weight outside the hall, and the beams creaked. Elara breathed, and the room remembered how to be still.
We hold.
She said simply. The village obeyed because sometimes the right orders are also the smallest. Night slid over both camps like ink. In the Valdorian lines, songs rose softly and died before the second verse. In Eldoria, the children slept without dreaming, and their mothers sat up and watched the doorways until their eyes stung.
Do you think she can really help us?
I just don't know what to believe.
On the ridge, Kalen stood coatless in the cold and listened for the lie that would let him live with the truth. He had told a runner to ride at dawn with a report that the bridges were washed out and the wagons mired. He had told his captains they would drill at first light. He had told himself that bravery wears many faces, and sometimes the bravest thing a sword can do is stay inside its scabbard. He could feel the king's fury walking toward him from a distance, patient and sure-footed. He closed his eyes and made a small vow into the dark, not to a god, to a line he would not cross, to a village he had not yet harmed, to a boy he had once been before the first oath unstitched him. At dawn, the mist lifted from the valley and revealed the same two worlds it had hidden at dusk. Eldoria's roofs held the dew. Kalen's camp held its discipline. The dragon drew a long breath somewhere above the clouds and let it go without fire. A rider reached Valdoria's gate by noon with a report that lacked heat and contained too much road. In the Blackstone Hall, King Althar read the distance between the lines and smiled without light. "Replace him," he said, "to no one and to everyone, and send someone who enjoys the taste of smoke." Far to the south, on a sunlit balcony, Empress Nyla received word that Valdoria's fist had curled. She set a goblet down and did not look at the sea. "Good," she said, and the green stone at her finger watched the light.
Victory.
On the Eldorian cliffs, Elara stood with Finn at her shoulder and Varkor at her back. She opened her hand and looked at the thin coin with the dawn notch and the dusk notch and the space between them where a man had tried to live. They would not trust him. They could not rely upon him. And yet, the plain was quiet because he had simply not spoken a single word that would have ruined them. Sometimes, mercy wore an enemy's colors. Elara tucked the coin into her bracer and faced the day that would not promise anything. They had not been spared, not yet, but they had been given a breath. For now, it was enough. Thank you for watching. I'm just a hard-working YouTuber, trying my best to bring you interesting stories. I will greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel. It means the world to me. Thank you once again.